Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Manitoba Pork Producer Engagement Series. This is the final presentation of our 2020-2021 Producer Engagement Series. And today we are going to be presenting on our Biosecurity 2021 initiatives and programming that we're offering here at Manitoba Pork. Today, we'll have myself, Jenelle Hamblin, Manager of Swine Health with Manitoba Pork, as well as Ria Teranishi, our Swine Field Auditor, speaking on our biosecurity initiatives and programming. Today, as it relates to questions, please direct all questions or place all questions in the chat box. We will answer all of the questions at the end of the presentation. A brief outline or overview of the topics that we're going to be covering today. MPC has had some pretty great involvement in some of the national biosecurity initiatives that are currently ongoing within the swine world. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of that work that is happening. And then I am then going to pop it over to Ria Teranishi, and she is going to speak to the biosecurity programming that we offer here at Manitoba Pork. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the importance of biosecurity as it relates to PED in Manitoba, being that we're coming into the spring months where we have traditionally seen cases of PED arise. So biosecurity, something that I don't think really I need to define for this group, but I think that it's always important to go back, look back and review the definition, certainly since it's something that we've been doing at the national level, as I mentioned previously. So the definition as it stands currently here in 2021, biosecurity is a set of management and physical measures designed to reduce the risk of introduction of a pathogen into an animal population, which is also known as bioexclusion, the spread of a pathogen within an animal population, which is called biomanagement, and the release of a pathogen from an animal population, or something known as biocontainment. We also can use terms such as internal and external biosecurity to describe the very same thing, but we felt that the bioexclusion and biomanagement pieces were a little bit more descriptive. These principles, practices, and protocols really are applied across our sector day in and day out. This is something that our sector has been doing for a long time, and we take a great deal of pride in. However, we have seen biosecurity awareness and practices enhance significantly over the past year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I can rest assured that the general public was not practicing biosecurity to the same level, or maybe even understood what biosecurity was prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit almost a year ago here in Manitoba. Certainly in those early days in May, June, July, certainly I did see the correlations between the practices that we were being asked to perform for COVID, something that is standard practice in the swine world. And so much so that we even had the comparisons and Google searches for biosecurity leading us to pages on the swine world. So certainly something that our sector is well versed in and well aware of. So much so that we have a national biosecurity standard that has been written and in practice for greater than 10 years, which has brought us to this practice, as all practices needing a review and an update. So this initiative of our National Biosecurity Standards Review is being led by the Canadian Pork Council, to which Manitoba Pork Council is highly involved. Both Mark Finn and myself sit on this committee, alongside veterinarians from across the country, producers from across the country, other members of provincial pork organizations, as well as the CFIA. So this review of the biosecurity standard started back last year. Actually, I believe it's been about a year. We've been working on this. Working through and reviewing pretty much any risk or contamination pathway that we could think of related to a commercial farm, but as well as a smallholder farm or a small scale farm, looking to assist and develop standards for that group of producers as well. So not only do we want to review the contamination pathways, the risks that are present, and how to mitigate those risks at a biosecurity level, we also wanted to develop a bit of a benchmark for what biosecurity is in our country, as well as develop a bit of a scoring system for some of these practices to rate or how they can be applied, being that biosecurity can be applied in many different ways and get the same result. As I mentioned, both Mark and I do sit on this committee, and we are 1 year in and hoping to have a feasible plan. I believe that the goal is by the fall, so I will keep you all posted on that. We are also very fortunate to have our very own Mark Finn leading the project on our national biosecurity training videos. So this is, again, another CPC-led initiative, and Mark, for those of you who don't know, shares his time between the Canadian Pork Council and us at Manitoba Pork. And he was the one that really took charge and led the development of 15 biosecurity training videos focused on peacetime biosecurity, so regular day-to-day biosecurity. These have been reviewed and approved by the National Biosecurity Standards Committee, one that I just described, and are ready to be launched, I believe, just later this month, and will be on the CPC website. So as soon as those are available, we will absolutely be sharing them with our producer mailing list as well. Some of the topics that are covered in these national biosecurity training videos, very much, very broad topic area, and as I mentioned, 15 topics in total. So entry in the controlled access zone, restricted access zone entry, farmyard traffic, manure application, dead stock and garbage disposal, feed deliveries, incoming pigs, loading pigs for transport, transporting internally, or delivering pigs to market, service provider biosecurity, when you're bringing in supplies or equipment, internal biosecurity, biocontainment, and pest management. So as I mentioned, these videos are set to launch later this month, and certainly we want to make good use of them throughout the sector, as lots of time and effort, and there's excellent information to be shared as it relates to biosecurity in the swine sector. So we'll keep you posted when that information and those videos are available. I am now going to pass it over to Ria, and she is going to give us an overview of some of our biosecurity programming that we have in-house here at Manitoba Pork. Over to you, Ria.
Thanks, Jenelle. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Ria Ternishi. I'm the swine field auditor here at Manitoba Pork. And I'll be speaking today on 2 programs I work on, the WASH certification and assessment, as well as the transporter biosecurity assessment. I'll get you to go to the next slide, Jenelle. There we go. So I'll start off with the commercial wash station assessment and certification. And I see this program as a valuable opportunity to assess the current wash standards in the sector, as well as suggest improvements to the process, as well as also creates a benchmark of cleaning and disinfection procedures, as well builds confidence in the standard of C&D at these commercial wash stations for producers. So this assessment must be completed to pass to achieve certification under our Manitoba Hog Transporter program. And to main certification, wash stations must be assessed and passed annually, but all the commercial wash stations are contracted. I'll get you to go to the next slide again. So the assessment was broken down into 2 parts. First was the wash facility assessment, which included things like traffic flow, building maintenance, SOPs, training for the staff. And then I would move into the wash procedure, which included an observation of the whole washing, cleaning, disinfection, and drying process. And to pass, a wash station needed to receive a score of greater than or equal to 80% and pass all the critical questions. And those critical questions were those areas deemed essential to receive a biosecure wash, and that's why we deemed those questions pass or fail. And I'll get you to move to the next slide, Jenelle. So some takeaways from the program last year in summer of 2020, 6 commercial wash stations participated. And again, it was an educational opportunity to identify risk and suggest improvements to their wash process. And all facilities were engaged and eager to implement the improvements suggested to them, and 3 wash stations achieved certification, and the next round of assessments will take place in the spring, summer of this year. I'll go to the next slide. So next, changing gears a bit, talking about transporter biosecurity assessments. So we all know high-risk facilities such as assembly yards and abattoirs pose a significant risk for contamination to operations. And these sites should always be treated as infected, and the highest level of biosecurity needs to be practiced when unloading or loading pigs. So that's why this assessment was developed, just seeing that potential risk. So these assessments were focused on awareness and education with the objective to highlight and communicate gaps to where improvements on biosecurity practices could be made during an unloading or loading event, with the ultimate goal to prevent any swine diseases coming back to your operation and ultimately protecting animals' health and well-being. Next slide. So I visited 5 high traffic facilities, each on 4 separate occasions over the course of August to November of last year. So those included Hams, High Life, Pioneer Meats, Quintains, and Park. So very broad area of facilities I was able to visit. And I assessed a total of 57 drivers on their biosecurity practices. The next slide, Jenelle. And the assessment itself, it was broken down into 4 different sections, which included prior to unload, unload, scrape out, and exit. And I just wanted to share with you guys today some of the common pathways I saw for contamination while I was out on the field. The first one being not very often, but sometimes there was no change of footwear over the whole transportation event. Boot covers were worn on the yard site, but failed to remove them when re-entering the truck cab. And that's an area of contamination just because you don't want to be bringing anything that could be potentially on the yard site into the truck cab, which is very hard to effectively clean and disinfect at the end of the day. Again, use coveralls worn during unload and scrape out, worn back into the truck cab for the same reason I said before, that truck cab is pretty hard to get an effective disinfect and clean of it. As well, changing in and out of footwear worn inside the trailer into footwear that was worn into the truck cab while standing on the yard site. Again, you just don't want to be bringing anything that could be potentially on that yard site into your truck cab. I'll get you to go to the next slide, Jenelle. So I just have some screenshots on this slide of our biosecurity resources that you could find on our website under the swine health section. The one on the left is actually a pamphlet that you can contact the front office, Diane, and she can print some off for you. So it just lays out the steps on a biosecure trailer entry and exit when you're delivering swine. And the video on the right is up on our YouTube channel, and it goes through the steps of a biosecure trailer entry with the Rubbermaid protocol. So I think these are really good resources for anyone looking to learn more about biosecurity when unloading swine. I suggest you check them out if you're interested. And you can move to the next slide, Jenelle. So some of the takeaways I had from this project, I reached out to each driver before leaving the site to provide suggestions on their biosecurity practices that could be improved upon, and then also highlight the ones that were done correctly on site. And I thought the conversations with all the drivers went really well, and they should yield a positive income, as most of the drivers were truly invested in improving their biosecurity and grateful for the feedback. And then at the end, the driver results were forwarded to the Origin Farms production manager. I think that's all I have for my slides, Jenelle. I'll pass it back on to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ria. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, these biosecurity assessment programming, both at the wash station as well as with transporter biosecurity assessments, we've had very positive feedback from our sector stakeholders as well as our producers saying that this type of work is very important in getting an idea or a benchmark of what our practices are on the landscape. So as I mentioned, if there are other ways that we can be out, Ria and I and the rest of our team can be out to support biosecurity through assessment programming, awareness programming, we are all ears, and we are interested in hearing any further ideas that we can expand our efforts in this area. Switching gears a little bit, I'm going to move over to to PED. So a spotlight on PED in Manitoba and some of the work that, that we are doing in this space. So as many of you or all of you know, PED, porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, entered Manitoba in 2014. And we have had cases in the province each year since. Along with that, or in that timeline, our knowledge on PED, as well as the biosecurity measures and protocols that we need to implement to effectively manage the virus, have evolved and improved. We developed a lessons learned document following our 2017 outbreak and have further continued to share information and ideas as related to how to effectively manage PED on the landscape. Many of our communication channels that were set up in 2017 remain today. Our Manitoba Swine Veterinary Group, as well as our Manitoba Disease Management Group, we meet monthly to share information on, well, not only PED as we've evolved, but certainly in the onset of the creation of those groups, PED was the focus, and it remains very high on the agenda around both of those calls to date as well. Our high traffic surveillance program, we're very fortunate here in Manitoba that we have the engagement from the sector that we do, as well as the support of our provincial government to facilitate this surveillance program at high traffic facilities. So weekly, we have samples being submitted from a number of abattoirs, assembly yards, wash facilities, testing for PED on the landscape. This gives us an excellent overview or knowledge of what the disease pressure is in the province in peacetime, but as well as in outbreak response, gives us the information that we need to know who and where we've seen positive samples, and allows us to give to provide accurate traceback if we do see a positive case. So certainly a program that has immense value here in the province and ongoing for the past 6 years. And lastly, as I just mentioned, the programming that RIA has really taken charge and led our biosecurity assessment and awareness programming. So not only being in the field and providing that those assessments and educational developments in the field, but also through communications and outreach back at the office as well. So as I mentioned, if there are other ways, other messages, other pathogens that we can be promoting, we are all ears. We did do back in December a webinar and a fact sheet on Strep Zoo. And certainly we are interested in providing the resources and the information that best serves the sector as a whole. Moving on, again, focusing on PED. And as I mentioned, we did see the cases of PED in Manitoba since 2014. And I bet you're all looking at this graph and thinking something very similar to what I thought when I put it together, or I have been thinking about for the past few weeks or even months. Looking at a little bit of a pattern here, if you will, or I'm hesitant to call it a pattern, but we started off in 2014 really without very high numbers of PED in the province, 4 in 2014, 1 in 2015, and 5 cases confirmed in 2016. And then I'm sure, as you all well remember, our major outbreak year of 2017 with 80 cases confirmed. Following that, we saw a sharp decrease of only 17 cases in 2018 confirmed. And then yet again in 2019, a very large outbreak year with 82 cases confirmed. 2020, a single digit, 3 cases only confirmed last year. And I think that really begs the question of what is 2021 going to look like? Are we in for another odd year outbreak experience, or can we keep things in these lower areas? So again, back to that question, is this a cycle or is this a pattern? And confidently, we can't say for sure. There are just far too many factors at play. 2020 last year, I think a lot of us, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, can understand that the pandemic biosecurity enhancements that we put into place for COVID-19 and for our own protection did a great job of also protecting against many other pathogens, including PED. So we'd be remiss to say that entire lockdown really that we did see in March, April, May, and really opening up, I believe it was mid-May to June, didn't have an impact, because certainly those actions across the entirety of the province would have had an action, as well as specific to the swine sector and stakeholder facilities, as well as on farm. We saw enhanced biosecurity measures, again, related to COVID-19 for our own protection, limiting visitors, visitors limited for sure, but only essential contact on the farm, enhanced cleaning and disinfection protocols that really would have an impact not only on COVID-19, but across the board. What we can say as well, that for high cases and low cases, we've seen interprovincial movement of market pigs coming through Manitoba. And with that, we've seen PED pop up in other parts of our province, whether it be in high traffic facilities. So we really do need to be diligent when thinking about how those animals are moving and what contacts they might have. All the work that we're doing around ASF risk planning and mitigation, we're learning about different types of biosecurity. We're learning about different types of responses. And certainly a lot of that, like I say, comes into play for other types of pathogens as well. Our overall improved understanding of PED absolutely has impacted how we've responded to it. We've had numerous types of risk or contamination pathways and risk mitigation measures that have been put into place as this virus has taught us what we need to do or what we need to expand our efforts in. We've seen an exceptional effort in targeted biocontainment in our manure applicators, in our transporters. The level of biosecurity that has changed in the transport world is excellent, as well as in our assembly yards. All of these stakeholders, these service providers have upped their game, and truthfully, we've seen the benefits of that enhanced biosecurity as it relates to PED. One that I think many of us throw our hands up in the air and say is you have no control over is the environmental conditions. And certainly we have had correlations with wind and weather patterns as it relates to PED in previous years. 2018, I think, is the most memorable in that we've seen intense dust storms through certain parts of southeastern Manitoba, so much so that it looked like a sandstorm driving through, where upon further analysis of wind and weather data as correlating to our outbreak pattern, we did see that there was causation, not only correlation, or significant data to support that. This past year, we also saw significant sector changes. We have fewer independent producers on our landscape. We saw some major ownership changes with that, new senior staff and management, which changes how facilities are operated and how biosecurity is managed on the landscape as well. So what more can we do? The threat of PED remains to our sector. It's certainly something that I think most of us would rather not have to deal with, but the threat is still there. And we do need to, especially now coming into our spring months, we do need to implement that enhanced biosecurity that we have come to know in the spring. However, in that same breath, we've been practicing biosecurity day in and day out for almost or better part of a year now, as it relates to COVID-19. Biosecurity has been in our faces for a year, and people are tired, and that is understandable. And so we need to be creative, and we need to think about our messaging and our practices. How can we continue down this path and ensure that our biosecurity remains at that high level, especially coming into this spring? We need to consider how we motivate through these spring months. talking about extra effort now versus an outbreak level response for the entire year. If our outbreak years have taught us anything, it's that cases popped up in the spring and we saw cases all the way through October. That's a long time, and we were fighting PED. So perhaps if we can get that motivation, we can get that extra effort now, we won't have to deal with it all through this summer and fall months. And lastly, of course, I ask all producers, if you haven't already, to please join our Manitoba Coordinated Disease Response. This is a program managed through Manitoba Pork Council. Please contact the front desk or RIA or myself directly, and we will get you logged on or signed on to the program. It's been an extremely effective way to share PED health and location information very quickly. And if you are within a high-risk area for PED, that communication is vital in order to get your biosecurity practices enhanced and to protect yourself against potentially bringing that virus onto your farm. So really, I guess my take-home message for the presentation is to beat the odds. Let's really consider some of these practices that many of you are probably already doing, including limiting your barn and yard contacts to essential reasons only, essential contacts only coming onto your yard and into your barns. Enhance your entry protocols. Consider doing dust control in your CAS or on your roadways. We've had excellent collaboration with our rural municipalities to coordinate and schedule dust control in the spring. And we've seen that it does have an impact to reduce the dust particles that are flying through the air that could be carrying a PED virus or any other pathogen. Consider parking away from the barn. And if possible, avoid staff sharing in these few months. Consider extra diligence during manure application, including liming your driveways when manure is being, or shortly before manure is being applied. Communicate when manure is being applied to your staff and any service providers that you may need to have on site during that time. In that same breath, enhanced internal and external communication. Should you be changing biosecurity protocols, enhancing them, ensure that your staff and anybody that's coming onto your farm is aware of that. Where to field questions, who has the information. If you have, like I say, service providers coming on, feed deliveries, transport, talk about biosecurity and what you're doing on your farm currently. And the last one I put on here, air filtration. Certainly there's been some very innovative techniques that have been used on the landscape as it relates to air filtration, recognizing that full-blown air filtration in a barn is costly and maybe not the right option for all. But like I say, there's been some interesting innovations, and I encourage you to share those innovations amongst yourselves. At this time, we will go to questions, and I will ask Arnie or Joey, who's been monitoring the chat, if there are any questions currently for Ria or I.
We have a question. It's asking when there have been large PED outbreaks, is the majority linked to small number of companies or is it widespread?
It is widespread. I don't know if I can further elaborate on that, but for sure that it hasn't been anyone in particular. It seems that PD doesn't discriminate. Have there been any other questions there, Arnie?
I haven't seen anything come up.
Okay, I'll give it maybe another minute or two in case somebody is typing into the chat box. Anything else come in, Arnie?
Sorry, nothing.
Okay, no, that's fine. I guess we answered all the questions in the presentation and the content.